Fair is foul, and foul is fair. What does that even mean? Well, it's one of the most famous lines in all of literature for a reason. It perfectly sets the stage for the unsettling, kinda upside-down world we're about to dive into. A world where good and evil, they aren't so clear-cut. They just bleed into one another until, honestly, you can't tell which is which.
So, today we are tackling Shakespeare's bloody masterpiece, Macbeth, but we're going to look at it through a really specific lens. We're going to see it not just as a classic tragedy, but as a kind of parable, a story about a man who was promised this magnificent harvest, but whose own impatience, his own violence, left him with nothing but a barren field.
All right, so let's set the scene. When we first meet Macbeth, you have to understand, he is the guy. He's the kingdom's greatest hero. They call him Valor's minion, a warrior who literally smoked with bloody execution defending his king. To use our parable, the soil of his life is incredibly rich. He's celebrated, he's powerful, and his future looks absolutely limitless.
And then, everything changes. Out on this storm-blasted heath, he runs into three, withered hags, the witches. And they plant a seed in his mind, a tiny little seed of an idea. They greet him with 3 titles. Now the first one, Thane of Glamis, he already holds it. No big deal. The second, Thane of Cawdor, whoa, okay, that's a shocking promotion. And then the third is the real bombshell, a promise of ultimate power, king hereafter. And just like that, the seed of ambition is sown.
But here's what's so fascinating, right? Look at Macbeth's reaction. You'd think he'd be thrilled, but he doesn't rejoice. He actually recoils, he pulls back. His friend Banquo even calls him out on it, like, hey, why do you seem to fear things that sound so good? So right away, you know this prophecy isn't some simple blessing. It's already causing this massive internal conflict. That little seed, it's already a pretty troubling one. So he goes home, and back at the castle, that little seed of ambition finds its most, let's say, enthusiastic gardener, Lady Macbeth. She hears the news and her first thought isn't, wow, amazing. It's, oh no, my husband is too decent, too full of the milk of human kindness to take the shortcut to the crown. She immediately starts pushing him, urging him to hide his deadly intentions, to look like an innocent flower, but be the serpent hiding underneath. She wants to force that harvest, and she wants to do it right now.
Okay, so this whole setup leads us to the first and probably the most common way people understand this story. We're going to call it the Olympian judgment. Think of it as the classic take, a straightforward tale of a good man's tragic fall from grace.
And once he's pushed, Macbeth just starts down this path of blood. First, he murders his king, then his friend Banquo, and then, in a truly horrific move, he slaughters the innocent family of his rival, Macduff. Every single step is driven by this spiraling paranoia, this desperate attempt to hold on to his stolen crown. He's trying to violently force his destiny into being, but all it does is lead to more and more bloodshed, and it all ends with his death, at the hands of a man who, it turns out, fulfills the witch's prophecy in the most unexpected way possible.
So if you're looking at it from this classical viewpoint, the takeaway is pretty simple, right? Macbeth committed crimes against the natural order of things, so his downfall is basically divine justice. It's a punishment that fits the crime. Like the play says, unnatural deeds do breed unnatural troubles. It's a clear, straightforward moral lesson.
But is that it? Is that the whole story? Is it really that simple? Is Macbeth just a cautionary tale about a good man who turned bad and, got what was coming to him?
Well, there's another way to look at this, a kind of dissenting voice coming from, let's call it, the underworld. And this view argues that Macbeth's story isn't a tragedy at all. No. It's not about a great man's tragic fall. It's about a failure of nerve.
Yeah, a failure of nerve. And this interpretation completely reframes everything we think we know about Macbeth's motives and what his ultimate weakness really was. See, from this perspective, the witches weren't some evil force tempting a good man. They were more like messengers of a really modern and kind of terrifying truth. The universe doesn't care. It has no moral compass. Fair is foul and foul is fair isn't a curse. It's a statement of fact, that the old rules just don't apply anymore. They weren't handing Macbeth a pre-written destiny. They were basically telling him, hey buddy, you're free. You get to write your own story.
And this, right here, is the absolute core difference. The traditional Olympian view sees a tragic hero who is corrupted by some outside evil. But this view from below, it sees a failed nihilist, a man who wasn't trapped by evil, but by his own crippling guilt. So his story isn't a moral lesson from the gods. It's a profound, personal failure of nerve.
Now, to really get this, we should probably define what we mean by nihilism. It's not just, believing in nothing. It's about that terrifying void, that emptiness that opens up when all the old values, like, say, the divine right of kings, are suddenly shattered, but you don't have the strength or the creativity to build new values to take their place.
And this really gets to the heart of the whole argument. Macbeth's real failure wasn't the murder. Think about it. He had the physical courage to literally kill a king. But what he didn't have was the psychological courage to kill the idea of kingship, to get rid of that old morality of right and wrong that was still living inside his own head.
So what you have is a man who seized ultimate freedom, but he was still a slave to his own conscience. That dagger of the mind he sees, the ghost of Banquo at the feast. In this view, those aren't supernatural punishments from the heavens. They're phantoms created by his own guilt. They're symbols of his complete inability to become the master of this new, valueless world he tried to create.
Okay, so all of this brings us to the end result of Macbeth's journey. What was the harvest he actually reaped from all those seeds of prophecy and violence?
Let's go back to that parable of the unsown seed. Macbeth was told the soil was rich. He was promised a kingdom, a huge harvest. But he was like an impatient farmer who just starts tearing at his own young crops, trying to force them to grow. His frantic, violent rush to seize power, it destroyed the very thing he wanted. He didn't cultivate his destiny. He just scorched the earth.
And when you look at it this way, his most famous speech becomes even more powerful. You know the one, a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. It's not just the cry of a man in despair, it's his final confession. He's admitting that in the new world he created by murdering the old one, he completely failed to give it any meaning. All his effort, his reign, his life, all that sound and fury, in the end, it signified nothing.
So in the end, it almost doesn't matter which view you take. Whether you see him as a tragic hero being punished by the gods, or as a failed nihilist haunted by his own mind, the outcome is exactly the same. He got the crown, sure, but he inherited a wasteland, a barren kingdom that was just a perfect reflection of his own empty soul.
And that just leaves us with one final lingering question, doesn't it? Macbeth's story is an absolute masterclass in destruction, but it forces us to ask a bigger question. What's the real difference between having the will to destroy an old world and having the strength, the courage, and the creativity it takes to actually build a new one worth living in? What does it really take to cultivate the harvest?